The Detroit Lions may have just received one of the biggest pieces of good news they could have hoped for before the season even begins, and it has absolutely nothing to do with a move they made themselves. According to reports discussed during recent NFL conversations, Green Bay's star pass rusher Micah Parsons is expected to miss a significant portion of the upcoming season while recovering from surgery, with timelines potentially stretching well beyond the early part of the year. For Lions fans, this is a development that immediately grabs attention because Parsons has been viewed as one of the most impactful defensive players in football. The discussion surrounding his recovery centers on a cautious approach, with references to a strict 9-month recovery guideline before even considering a return to game action. And as many players have learned throughout the league, simply being cleared to return does not mean returning at full strength. We've seen this story play out countless times in the NFL. A player comes back earlier than expected, gets onto the field, but isn't quite the same athlete immediately. Recovery isn't just about being healthy enough to play. It's about regaining explosiveness, confidence, conditioning, and the ability to perform at an elite level against the best competition in the world. For Green Bay, this creates a major challenge. Parsons wasn't simply another starter on their defense. He was viewed as a true difference maker, someone capable of changing the entire dynamic of a football game. His presence alone forced offenses to adjust protections, alter play calling, and constantly account for where he was lined up. Losing that kind of impact player for a substantial portion of the season changes the equation dramatically. From Detroit's perspective, however, the conversation quickly shifts from what Green Bay may be losing to what the Lions might be gaining internally. And one of the most fascinating developments coming out of minicamp has been the emergence of rookie linebacker Jimmy Rolder. If we're being honest, many fans weren't expecting Rolder to make this kind of impression so quickly. The concerns were understandable. He entered the league with relatively limited collegiate experience compared to many prospects. He had fewer than 1,000 college snaps and only one full season as a starter. Those facts alone caused many observers to assume his transition to the NFL would require significant time. But what is becoming increasingly clear is that experience isn't always measured purely by snap counts. Rolder arrived from Michigan, where he spent years learning within defensive systems that closely resembled NFL structures. Under coordinators who implemented sophisticated schemes, he gained exposure to concepts that many college players never encounter before reaching the professional level. As a result, his understanding of defensive responsibilities appears much further along than many initially expected. That has started showing up on the practice field. One of the biggest pre-draft criticisms surrounding Rolder involved his zone coverage ability. Evaluators questioned whether he could consistently handle coverage responsibilities at the next level, yet one of the highlights drawing attention during minicamp involved him dropping into coverage and coming away with an interception. Those are exactly the types of moments coaches want to see from young linebackers. Even beyond the mental side of the game, observers have consistently pointed out the physical differences between Rolder and some of the linebackers currently competing for snaps. His size, length, and athletic profile stand out. The combination of height, range, and movement skills gives Detroit another intriguing piece within a linebacker room that already possesses considerable talent, and that's what makes this development particularly interesting. The Lions don't necessarily need Rolder to become a star immediately. That's the luxury of having a roster this talented. Instead, they can allow him to develop naturally while contributing where he's ready. If he continues progressing at the current pace, Detroit could find itself with another valuable defender entering the rotation much earlier than expected. The excitement surrounding Rolder also reflects something larger happening throughout the organization right now. There is a growing sense that this roster possesses elite talent across virtually every position group. Think about the names currently leading this football team. Detroit has legitimate arguments for elite players at offensive tackle, running back, wide receiver, linebacker, tight end, quarterback, and multiple positions throughout the defense. What's even more impressive is that many of these players are either in their prime or entering it. That wasn't always the case for the Lions. There have been previous eras where Detroit featured a handful of stars. Fans remember teams built around elite talents like Matthew Stafford, Calvin Johnson, and Ndamukong Suh. Those teams had star power, but the overall roster depth often wasn't comparable to what exists today. This current version of the Lions feels different. Instead of relying on a few superstars, Detroit now appears loaded with impact players throughout the lineup. The conversation is no longer about whether the Lions have enough top-end talent. The conversation is whether this collection of talent can finally put everything together and reach the ultimate goal. And that's where minicamp observations become so important. The defense has reportedly shown encouraging signs early, generating turnovers and creating difficult situations for the offense. While it's far too early to draw definitive conclusions, it's generally a positive sign when a defense under an established coordinator begins building momentum during off-season practices. With new offensive leadership adjusting to its role and the defense continuing to gain familiarity within the system, many expected the defense to have moments of success during minicamp. The question is whether those flashes can translate into meaningful improvements once the regular season arrives. Because if Detroit's defense takes even a modest step forward while the offense maintains its high level of production, this team could become even more dangerous than it was a season ago. And that brings us to perhaps the biggest question facing the Lions as training camp approaches. If players like Jimmy Rolder continue developing faster than expected, and if the defense truly has more depth than it did a year ago, could this finally be the most complete Detroit Lions roster we've seen in decades? What do you think, Lions fans? Is Jimmy Rolder the surprise player who could make the biggest impact this season? Or is there another young Lion you're watching closely? One area that could end up determining just how high this team's ceiling really is comes along the defensive front, and the conversations coming out of minicamp suggest that Detroit may finally have something they have been searching for behind Aiden Hutchinson: legitimate depth. For the last couple of seasons, whenever discussions turned toward the Lions' pass rush, the focus almost always started and ended with Hutchinson, and understandably so. He's been the centerpiece of the defensive line, the player offense's game plan around every single week, but one of the concerns that repeatedly surfaced was how much responsibility was being placed on his shoulders. When you're asking a defensive end to be on the field nearly every snap, eventually it catches up with you. The NFL season is simply too long and too physical. Even the league's best pass rushers need help. They need rotational players capable of maintaining pressure when they're resting. They need teammates who can force offenses to account for more than one threat. That is why the developments at defensive end may be more important than many fans realize. The expectation entering the season appears straightforward. Aiden Hutchinson and DJ Wonnum are projected to be the primary starters. That's already a solid foundation. Wonnum brings experience and gives Detroit another proven option opposite Hutchinson. But what becomes interesting is what sits behind them. Peyton Turner continues generating discussion as someone who could become an important rotational contributor if he can stay healthy. The talent has never been the question. Availability has been the challenge. If he remains on the field, Detroit suddenly has another player capable of making life difficult for opposing quarterbacks. Then there are the younger names beginning to emerge during practices. Derek Moore has been mentioned as a player who may take some time before fans fully appreciate what he can become. That's often the reality with young defensive linemen. Development at the position isn't always immediate. Sometimes the flashes appear first before the production catches up, but the belief seems to be that his role could grow significantly as the season progresses. What's encouraging is that the conversation no longer sounds desperate. Last year, it often felt like the Lions were constantly searching for answers behind Hutchinson. Every injury created concerns. Every missing contributor seemed magnified. This year, the discussion feels different. There is genuine confidence that multiple players can contribute, and that depth could have a major impact on Hutchinson himself. Imagine a scenario where Detroit can reduce his workload without sacrificing production. Instead of playing nearly every defensive snap, he can remain fresh for critical situations. His explosiveness late in games improves. His effectiveness over the course of an entire season improves. The Lions get a better version of their star pass rusher simply because they don't have to overuse him. That's the type of roster building that separates good teams from championship contenders. What's also fascinating is how all of these pieces connect back to the larger picture surrounding the Lions entering this season. There is a growing belief that the offense is going to remain productive regardless of some off-season changes. The offensive line may look different than previous years. There is a new offensive coordinator stepping into a major role. There will naturally be an adjustment period. But even with those changes, confidence remains high because of the talent Detroit possesses. Last season offered plenty of evidence supporting that confidence. Despite dealing with offensive line challenges and significant pressure situations, Jared Goff continued producing at a high level. He remained among the league's productive quarterbacks while operating under circumstances that weren't always ideal. That matters because it suggests the offense has a strong foundation. The running game remains loaded with talent. The receiving core continues to develop. The tight end position remains one of the strengths of the roster, and the quarterback has proven he can continue producing even when conditions aren't perfect. So when coaches and observers see the defense generating interceptions during minicamp, that's naturally going to grab attention. Reports indicated that multiple quarterbacks experienced difficult moments during practices. Normally, fans might worry about offensive struggles, but at this stage of the offseason, many view that as an encouraging sign for the defense. After all, the offense has already established itself. The biggest question entering this season has never really been whether Detroit can score points. The bigger question has been whether the defense can consistently complement that offense over the course of an entire year. If the answer turns out to be yes, the rest of the NFC should be paying attention, because when you look across this roster, it's becoming increasingly difficult to identify major weaknesses. There are stars at premium positions, there is improving depth behind those stars, there are young players emerging, there are veterans entering the prime years of their careers. And perhaps most importantly, there is a growing sense of confidence throughout the organization that this team is built to compete with anybody. That's why the news surrounding Green Bay's situation feels even more significant. While one division rival faces questions about replacing a game-changing defender for a large portion of the season, Detroit is spending its offseason discussing emerging talent, growing depth, and players exceeding expectations during minicamp. Those are the types of conversations contenders want to be having. The Lions still have plenty to prove once real football begins. Training camp is coming, preseason battles are approaching, roster decisions still need to be made. None of the optimism guarantees victories. But if the early signs from minicamp are accurate, Detroit may have positioned itself to enter the season with more depth, more talent, and more confidence than at any point in recent franchise history. The Lions still have plenty to prove once real football begins. Training camp is coming, preseason battles are approaching, roster decisions still need to be made. None of the optimism guarantees victories. But if the early signs from minicamp are accurate, Detroit may have positioned itself to enter the season with more depth, more talent, and more confidence than at any point in recent franchise history. One of the reasons that confidence continues to grow is because the conversation around this team has completely changed from what Lions fans were used to for so many years. Think about it for a moment. There was a time when Detroit fans entered every season hoping a few star players could somehow carry the roster.